There is an incredibly cheap tourney coming up.
When?
An incredibly cheap tourney on December 31st, New Year's Eve at noon Pacific, and it costs 0.1 millibits. That's like $1.70 to play.
On Nitrogen Sports Poker Room?
Nitrogen Sports Poker Room. It's a Bitcoin-only poker site, Grant, and you got to get in. You got to use the link in the description, though, if you want to play in this tournament. It's already got 100 millibits guaranteed. It's going to be a massive overlay. Get in there, man.
Get in there and use the link in the description, or else you won't even get to see the tournament. We'll be playing the tournament,
Yes.
so come play with us on Nitrogen.
Get in there, get you some poker.
The dynamic of an amateur versus a pro in a cash game can get kind of weird sometimes. Often it's the amateur trying to outplay the pro, and the pro trying to figure out where the amateur is on the spectrum of skill, and that's what Jason Koon has to do against John Duthie in this pretty high-stakes cash game.
Yeah, it's 5,100, which is already pretty big, and these guys are deep, deep, deep. John Duthie's the effective stack with over $25,000 in front of him, so 250 blinds or so. This can's going to get pretty interesting.
The river is super interesting, so
Yeah.
hold on for that, and that's probably why Mark Testart suggested it. Use Twitter, include a YouTube link.
Please do those things. Also, timestamp it. That's important, too.
Do that.
We're going to break down this hand as we go, so get ready for some analysis.
Duthie comes in raising with the ace-3 suited from early position. Jason Koon, welcome to the table, man. Looking down at ace-king, gonna 3-bet it.
I thought Martin compared that to higher. Maybe he was wrong.
Back over to Duthie. Suited ace, could call, could 4-bet. He's gonna take a flop.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I said.
Where's that tournament? When?
10-3-3, huge flop for John Duthie. Now, he would probably wish his opponent had aces and kings, not ace-king, but it's still going to be quite tough for Jason Koon to not lose a sizable amount of money here. The main question for Duthie, trap out of position or go for the raise. Personally, on a board like this, I think he should just call and give Koon a chance to barrel on later streets.
Depends on who's coming. I don't know. So tough to say.
Duthie elects to go for the slow play. The turn comes to 6 of diamonds, and Duthie checks again over to last year's winner of the Seminole Hard Rock Poker Open Championship, Jason Koon. This is a board that's tough for his opponent to have too much. The only sets he has to be worried about are 10-10 or 6-6, and his opponent mainly is going to have hands like flush draws, a 10, or lower pairs. Now here on the turn, Duthie, once again facing a bet, decides to go for the slow play.
John Duthie is loose, huh? I mean,
Yes.
loose calls pay off sometimes, I guess. I mean, this is pretty nice. We get to call with the ace-3 suited and just flop the threes. That's pretty cool.
I mean, if only Jason Koon had the aces or the kings like he's repping, how much money could we make? Oh, wait. Koon's putting all this money in
He already
anyway.
just put in
It's okay.
1,500 on the flop and 4,200 on the turn. Feels pretty good to me.
Does feel pretty good.
Now, this pre-flop call we think is bad. We think it's bad to open under the gun with ace-3 suited. We don't need to talk about that anymore, though. That's just bad. We don't do it. I mean, it's easy. So let's get to the flop, where Duthie decides to check. That's fine, playing in flow. You would expect Koon to check back ace-king some of the time on this board, but when it's under the gun and under the gun +1, Jason Koon has a very strong range here, maybe his strongest range in all of poker. So it makes sense to bet to try to get Duthie off most of what he has.
I mostly agree with that. Also, Duthie, as we can see, is pretty wide here. I'm sure Koon's aware that he's got a massive range advantage.
Who's Kroon?
Kroon. Yeah, there's a guy named Mark Kroon who went deep in the World Series.
I remember that guy.
Yeah. He's friends with Phil Hellmuth. But I'm talking about Jason Koon, of course, and he's got a crazy range advantage over the John Duthie under the gun calling range. Under the gun meaning raise and then call the 3-bet. Crazy range advantage. He knows this. He's also got to believe 2 barrels is usually going to do the trick against hands like pocket 7s, not pocket 6s on the turn, but maybe pocket 8s, pocket 9s, things like that.
Now you might be thinking Jason Koon is going to have a lot of trouble folding out a better hand on the flop, and that is true. But John Duthie is going to have a lot of hands that he just wants to protect against. So John Duthie will fold his 7-8 of diamonds here, you know? We don't want to give him a free shot at that. And Koon knows, as we can see on the turn, that he has to barrel again in order to try to get Duthie off hands like pocket 8s, like you were saying.
I mean, if you're Duthie and you've got ace-10 suited here, you call the 3-bet from +1, you call the c-bet, it's the turn he bets again, you're losing to all value for sure.
Right, so that's enough about Koon so far. Let's talk about Duthie's decisions to just call on the flop and the turn. Is it better to check raise? Let's talk about the flop first.
Well, it's an interesting thing. On one level, my first instinct anyway was that you should be check raising this as John Duthie because you're check raising into such a crazy strong range of Koon here, right? Koon has a lot of overpairs here that I think he just will not be able to fold on this 2-spade board.
Right.
Also, as John Duthie, it's possible our image is such that Koon will believe we're check-raising hands like ace-10 and jacks and things like that.
We're not sure, but maybe.
Maybe, but certainly spades are at least possible for us to check raise, right?
It's possible, but the converse of that is that you would expect Duthie never to check raise as a bluff here because Jason Koon, as we said, has the strongest part of his range that he
Yes.
can ever have. That's not a part of a range that people usually attack. So it's really hard for Duthie to have a bluff. He might scare Jason Koon off of overpairs eventually if he check raises now.
This is true, but the converse of that, of course, is the old, well, what can you really have here? You have pocket tens? Because what else in the world can you check raise if you're Jason Koon, right? You might be thinking. And that's a reasonable question to ask. It turns out Duthie can somehow have a 3, which you would never expect.
Koon never expects a 3 in Duthie's range because of that very loose open and call pre-flop. Now, we get to the turn, and Duthie again chooses not to check raise. The pot is getting big because Koon decides to bet big again and again, and this is part of why I really like Duthie not check raising either street. Because if Koon had a hand like aces or kings, he might think Duthie has something like jacks or ace-10, and he's going to try to overbet shove the river to get all of it. It's about a pot and a half on the river once Duthie calls the turn. Duthie might see the stack sizes, and that makes more sense than if they were deeper. Like if they were deeper, I would expect to check raise more often from Duthie. But when they're not super deep, I think this is maybe the correct line.
Also, of course, this way, if there are any bluffs, and as we can see, there actually are here, even on the turn, we get to keep them alive rather than if we check raise on the flop or on the turn, we blow them away.
Right. So I guess for Duthie, he's just hoping no spade on the river, nothing that scares Jason Koon,
No
and
10.
maybe Koon will bluff again. That'd be great. Or maybe he'll check and Koon will shove with his aces and he'll get to win.
Yeah, or bet most of the pot, which
Yeah.
is still well above expectation with our hand.
He wants to trap his opponent. He absolutely will value bet some very strong hands like aces or kings or queens. And also, if he has ace-king and hits, I don't know, let's say a king, he might bet the river for some value.
I would guess that the average is 25%.
However, Duthie has other plans. I'm not a huge fan of betting here. If Jason Koon hit this card, he's going to bet himself. And if he was bluffing, now you don't give him a chance to bluff. Very tough spot here for Koon, but really no way around it. Top pair, top kicker, you got there on the river. Sometimes you just have to see what they've got.
All in.
Koon actually decides he's going to play for all of it. I was not expecting this at all. This is quite thin to say the least. When Duthie bets this river, he's saying he has a hand sort of like king 10, or maybe some kind of boat that wanted to make sure he got value, or possibly trips. He's not really saying he has a king, so this seems way too thin on the river.
Wow. Oh.
Rips.
Yes, that one's going to work.
You don't really expect to see someone shove on the river with one pair when someone bets into them, but that just happened. And is it bad or is it good? This is the question, sir.
Well, it's Jason Koon, so it's probably good.
Probably good.
But we went way in depth in our podcast. We came to the conclusion of maybe.
Huh?
We're not sure. Let's
Yeah.
talk about John Duthie's decision first, which we do not like. Betting 5,500 into 13K on the river, this seems like a massive mistake with the top of our range here. We are missing out on a ton of value.
Yeah, I mean, I think what John Duthie's thinking is he wants to get value out of the jacks and queens that are often going to check back this river.
Sure.
Right? And so by betting 5,500, he thinks he's going to force them into calling. But the problem is, every time Koon has aces and ace-king, you would expect anyway, you're going to make a lot less money because he's going to call, and instead of making 10,000 on this river, you only make 5,500. That's got to way more than pay for the aces and for the queens and jacks.
Right, and we played it this way to get here and let Jason Koon blast off on the river, right?
Right.
I liked the check calls because of that. And now we're not letting him do that. We're betting a tiny amount where Koon has been sizing it up for the whole hand. I feel like we're just missing out on a ton of value. Turns out we're not, actually.
Turns out we're not.
I mean, this is a miracle that somehow Jason Koon moves in. And I know when you look at it initially, you think, that's bad, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a pretty bad move in. But if you go a little bit more in depth, let's think about it a little harder. When Duthie bets 5,500 into 13K, if Koon is putting Duthie on amateur, what does that look like?
On, what was that?
Amateur.
On amateur.
Yeah.
He's putting him on amateur?
Yeah, being an amateur.
Oh, okay, he's saying you're an amateur.
Yeah.
Okay. What does it look like? That means he thinks it's a blocker bet.
Yeah.
Right? He thinks you've got a little something, you want to make sure you get some value, and you're afraid, you don't want me to bet too big or anything like that and get blown off the hand. So I'm just going to bet this much, so that's going to work out great.
Right, like jacks.
Right. Jacks, ace-10, queens are really good candidates
Yeah.
for this, right? And so Koon's thinking, You always have this, John Duthie. You always have a worse hand than me, and it's basically a free roll for me to move in here.
Right, and he's not worried so much about Duthie having strong value because of the way the board ran out. How can Duthie have a 3 in his hand?
No, he
That's
can't.
not expected. So we're worried about a set of 10s that still played all the way here and then only bet 5,500, or a turn set of 6s that did the same thing.
Maybe the one King 10 suited that's left in the deck,
Yeah.
which John Duthie clearly could have,
Right.
based on the way he's
But
played
we might
the
not
ace-3.
know that as Jason Koon.
We may not know that, we might. But either way, that's just one combo.
So Koon is probably thinking, I can maybe sometimes get called by ace-10 if Duthie doesn't believe me, jacks, queens, king-queen of spades, and king-jack of spades. Now, the question really Jason Koon has to ask himself is, can I actually get called by those hands?
Right.
Even if Duthie way more frequently has those hands than hands that beat Jason Koon, is there value in this race?
It's a really good question because Koon is repping crazy, crazy strong. He 3-bet the under the gun razor. He went bet, bet, shove over the bet on the river. That's as strong as you can be, right? Every single action has been aggressive that he's taken, and he's put in all his chips, even when his opponent has shown strength and is a fairly strongly defined range himself. That's pretty powerful stuff. The question is, it's actually stronger than what Koon really has.
Yeah.
Which is weird, right?
Well, it's kind of a merging of his range in the
Yeah.
end. Now, maybe we're wrong and he's not putting Duthie on amateur. Maybe he's putting Duthie on talented amateur, which
Sure.
would mean that Duthie would realize that Koon has to be polarized here, even though he doesn't have to be. So this is what the range merge is here. He's choosing a part of his range that he's usually just going to call with and taking the polarized line with it. So Duthie might be sitting there thinking, what, you have a set of 10s or you have a set of kings? That's not enough value. I have to call with my queens. So maybe Koon thinks Duthie has that thought process, and that allows him to move in with ace-king as kind of a merge.
Right, right. And that's possible. I actually think almost always when Jason Koon makes this play, he is free rolling his opponent
Almost
in this
always.
spot. And so it's probably is profitable because he almost can never actually lose chips by doing it. But today, in this game, in this hand, he did lose the chips.
I mean, sometimes when you run into the rich guy with the ace-3, you just can't do anything but lose.
Yep. So a lot of things happened there.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, there's so much to talk about, so much for you to potentially comment on. The way Duthie decided to play this really on every street is interesting, and we'd love to hear what you think. But mostly, we got to know what you think about Koon shove on the river. Do you think that is ultimately a profitable play or not? It sure didn't work out this time. But over time, is it a profitable play? Let us know in the comments. We're looking forward to reading them.
Now, we've had interesting cash games that have occurred on that very same show on the breakdown.
Yeah.
One includes Antonio Esfandiari, pro, Rob Young, amateur, playing a super weird, super huge pot, like way too big of a pot for what it's supposed to be. If you want to check that out, click right up there.
Once again, a crazy, monstrous river bet, sort
Yeah.
of out of nowhere. Definitely worth checking out for sure. If you want to know how we came to all these thoughts about this hand, it's in our podcast. That's where we hash it all out. It's the breakdown presented by the Poker Guys. It's like 45 minutes long or so, just talking about this one hand. You'll get to know how we came to all this and see if you agree with our thought process or not.
Just try the podcast out one time.
One
if you haven't
time.
tried it, just give it a
It's
shot.
free.
It is free.
It is
For
free.
now, you better get on it now.
I heard
It might
that.
cost $1,000 in the future. I don't know.
mean,
It's possible.
Everything goes up, man.
And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.